Today on Sports Central, we go over our 2022 college football predictions for the Iowa Hawkeyes, one of the top teams in the Big Ten in the 2021 season, as this team went 10-4 overall. They won the Big Ten West and made it to Indianapolis for the Big Ten championship game. Ended up losing that game to Michigan, but in the end, still an outstanding season for the Hawks. But how this team be in 2022, that's what we'll be going over here today. We'll be analyzing this team and predicting their schedule game by game in this video, starting out with your team trends. Iowa 10-4 last season. They were 6-1 in their first 7 games, and then 4-3 in their last 7. This team was undefeated for a long time last season, and I mean this team got ranked as high as, believe it or not, number 2 in the nation. If you're an Iowa fan, you knew that. I mean this team was ranked number 2 heading into that Purdue game on October 16th, which they ended up losing 7-24. So, I mean, they got up to number 2, ended up falling off a bit after that as they lost to Wisconsin as well, 27-7. It's a couple of tough losses there, maybe in between the Purdue and Wisconsin games. But still, I mean, it was a great season for Iowa. I mean, this team to get to 10 wins, to make it to Indianapolis, to win the Big Ten West. I mean, it was a good season for this team despite maybe some of the disappointing games that came with it. They beat Iowa State in week 2, 27-17. I mean, Iowa State was very hyped up going into the 2021 season. So for them to go on the road against the number 9 team in the nation, that was a huge win. They also beat Maryland on the road 51-14. You can see why the Hawks were ranked in the top 4 for a couple of weeks there. I mean, they beat Penn State, the number 4 team in the nation at the time, 23-20. Turns out Iowa State and Penn State weren't very good last season. Looking back, so I mean those 2 wins looked great at the time, but not so much looking back in the off-season here. But once again, they lost to Purdue, they lost to Michigan 42-3 in the Big Ten title game. So that game wasn't even close. Michigan took care of the Hawkeyes in that matchup, and you lost to Kentucky in your bowl game 17-20. So kept that game close against Kentucky, one of the surprise teams of the season. But in the end, I mean, what it comes down to is Iowa's offense just was not good enough to be a national contender last season. Defensively, this team was able to be a big national contender, and you saw that in multiple games in the season. This defense was outstanding at many parts of the season, but this offense just really gave Iowa issues. And I mean, their offense wasn't bad, but it certainly struggled at times, and the quarterback situation obviously was definitely a big flaw of this team last season. Looking at your roster preview going into next season, you do return both of your top quarterbacks, Spencer Petras and Alex Padilla. Of course, I mean, Spencer Petras was the top quarterback of last season. He played the most, putting up 1,800 yards, 10 touchdowns, 9 picks, and a 57% completion rate. So, I mean, pretty poor stats out of Petras last season. He certainly could have been better. And Alex Padilla, of course, last season, he put up 600 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, and a 49% completion rate when he played. So both quarterback completion rates are extremely low. They turn over the ball too much, and in the end, the quarterback situation was just a mess last season. And they couldn't really find their guy. I mean, Petras was once again your top quarterback. He played the majority of the season, but I mean, even Padilla just couldn't get anything going. And I mean, the running back situation, I mean, Tyler Goodson single-handedly, I mean, he carried this offense last season. He was the best player on this offense last season, putting up over 1,300 yards of offense, nearly 1,407 touchdowns. He had a great season. He quietly had a really good season, and he deserves some credit for what he did. Gavin Williams is returning, your second running back from last season, which, by the way, losing Goodson is going to have a huge impact, I think. I mean, this offense returns most of their players from last season. It's just losing. If you could bring back Tyler Goodson, that'd be huge, but unfortunately you're losing him. Gavin Williams is coming back, second running back who put up 300 yards last season but no touchdowns. Sam Laporta's coming back. Of course, Iowa's always had a lot of great tight ends, and Sam Laporta is the next one. He is certainly a very talented player, 670 yards last season and 3 touchdowns. The receiving core also looks pretty good. You got Keegan Johnson coming back. You got your third receiver coming back. You do lose Charlie Jones. That was recent. He actually is transferring to Purdue. So that's unfortunate for Iowa. If you could have him coming back, that would be huge. But unfortunately, couldn't retain him. So he's headed off to be a Boilermaker. But you got Keegan Johnson coming back, who I really like. 360 yards and 2 touchdowns last season. And, of course, Laporta is going to have a huge impact as well. Iowa's always got some great tight ends making major plays. You do lose 2 on the offensive line, 1 defensive lineman, 1 linebacker, and 3 in the secondary. So defensively, you lose 5 starters, but the depth defensively is pretty good, so I'm not too terribly concerned there. Of course, 3 in the secondary is my main concern defensively, but once again, I mean, I do feel like you'll be just fine with the depth that you do have there. So once again, offense was the big issue last season. If this offense was better, this team could have very well been in the college football playoff last season. It could have been Iowa instead of Michigan. I mean, if this offense was just better. I mean, their defense, obviously, I mean, they did allow 42 points to Michigan, and maybe they had a couple of bad games, but for the most part, I mean, Iowa's defense was very good at multiple points last season, only allowing 17 to Iowa State was huge at the time, allowed 20 to Penn State. I mean, and of course, I mean, if you look at that Northwestern game, that is a perfect representation of kind of how the season was for Iowa. A lot of close games. They beat Northwestern by only scoring 17 points. The final score is 17-12. I mean, their defense held them to 12 points, but it wasn't a very clean game. And in the end, I mean, Iowa got the win, and they got up to 10 wins last season, but it just wasn't the cleanest season. And I mean, they had a lot of close games, and obviously the offense just was an issue last season. But brings up the question, will this team be a repeat champion of the Big Ten West next season? Honestly, I've got no idea. I mean, the Big Ten West is wide open going to next season. You got 5 to 6 teams that could win that division next year. You got, of course, Nebraska. You got Wisconsin. You got Minnesota. I mean, you got Purdue. Purdue, keep an eye on them. And you also got, I mean, even Northwestern. They just won it a couple of years ago. Northwestern could be up there. Illinois is the one team that I just don't think has a chance. But, I mean, even Iowa's got, I mean, there are 5 to 6 teams really have a good chance to make a run at that division next season. But transfer portal and recruiting now going to next season. This team really hasn't been terribly active in the transfer portal. You lose Matthews, receiver. He's in the transfer portal. Myman, tight end, is off to Florida International. Desmond Hudson, receivers in the transfer portal. So you're losing a few receivers here. Tyrone Tracy's coming in from Purdue. You lose Charlie Jones to Purdue once again, but you do bring in Deuce Hogan, or you lose Deuce Hogan, quarterback who's off to Kentucky, but obviously hasn't had a big impact on this team. So recruiting-wise, 30th in the nation, 6th in the Big Ten, not terrible. You got 2 4-stars coming in, and then 16 3-stars. But that's it. Let's look at your schedule now going into the 2022 season. So you start the season against South Dakota State, FCS opponent that's usually pretty decent. So I mean, I definitely favor Iowa there, but you don't want to sleep on South Dakota State, considering they're always a top team in the FCS. And then you got Iowa State coming to town. You got Nevada at home after that. Rutgers on the road. You got Michigan, rematch of the Big Ten title game from last season. You got them coming to Iowa City. You got Illinois on Ohio State, both on the road after that. Northwestern coming to town. Then you go to Purdue. You got Wisconsin at home, Minnesota on the road, and then Nebraska finish off the season at home. So, I mean, it's not a terribly, I mean, you do play, this is probably one of the tougher schedules of the Big Ten. I mean, your crossover games into the East Division are Michigan, Ohio State, and Rutgers. Michigan and Ohio State are my 2 projected teams to be at the top of that division next season. Both of them will be national contenders. And, of course, your non-conference schedule. Iowa State, not too worried about them. They're going to go into a rebuild phase for the 2022 season. But, I mean, once again, it is a challenging schedule, certainly one of the tougher ones of the Big Ten going into next season. But once again, looking at September here, South Dakota State, easy win. I do expect you to beat them by a couple of touchdowns there. Iowa State, once again, not concerned about the Cyclones either. You beat them last season. You'll beat them again this season. And I'll say a closer one, but I certainly want to favor Iowa there. Nevada, easy win. And then you got Rutgers on the road. It's a road game, but I'm going to still favor the Hawks there by a couple of touchdowns. You start the season 4-0. I'm pretty confident you start the season 4-0, and if you don't, I'd be kind of concerned. But looking at October here, you got a couple of tough ones in October. Michigan coming to town. That is going to be a very intriguing game there because you got Iowa, who's wanting to get revenge on Michigan for, I mean, Iowa got completely just beat down by the Wolverines in the Big Ten title game. And so you got Michigan coming to town. Iowa's always a tough place to play. I mean, Iowa has upset some big-time teams in the past in Kinnick. So, I mean, that's not a given, but I'm going to favor Michigan there in a close one. I think Michigan pulls it out in the end. Wolverines should be once again a good team next season and very close, and that game could potentially be one of the big upsets of the season, but I'm going to favor Michigan there. Illinois on the road, close one, honestly, but I'm going to still favor Iowa for sure there. And then you got your bye, and then Ohio State on the road. I will favor the Buckeyes pretty confidently there. With it being on the road, the Buckeyes probably, they're going to be one of the best teams in the nation next season. So I'll favor Ohio State there. The Northwestern coming to town, easy win. So you're 6-2 heading into November here, which is a crucial month. I mean, in November you play Purdue, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Nebraska. 4 of the other teams that I think have got the best chance to win the West Division, especially Purdue, Wisconsin, Minnesota. I think Purdue, Wisconsin, and Minnesota are my top 3 in the Big Ten West. Iowa's not too far behind, and that said, here's what I got. So I have you beating Purdue on the road, which would be a huge win if you can knock off Purdue. Then you beat Wisconsin after that. So you're in really good shape heading into those last 2 matchups against Minnesota and Nebraska, but you lose to Minnesota on the road. I think the Gophers pull that one out. And Nebraska, that one is a 50-50 game. I mean, Nebraska hasn't beaten Iowa in a long time. Honestly, I feel like it's between Purdue and Nebraska. You're going to lose to either Purdue or Nebraska. You're going to win one of those games and you're going to lose one. It's just a matter of which way it goes. And I'm going to lean towards Nebraska winning that game. I feel like Nebraska finished out the season strong here. I mean, the Cornhuskers, I feel like this is the season they finally break through. It sounds crazy because, I mean, they haven't yet. But this is, I mean, the way their schedule's built, I think Nebraska gets 6 to 8 wins this season. And so they'll be decent. I think they end up winning that one in a close one. But then again, going to Purdue is not an easy matchup either. So you could beat Nebraska and lose to Purdue. Once again, could go either way. But I'm going to go with 8-4 here for the Hawkeyes next season. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below for the Hawkeyes, and I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.